let's start. Thanks very much. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks.
The foundation of our house was built on an anthem. The anthem was a prayer our hearts rendered in the language of silence. The rooms reflect our hearts, with no light, no warmth. The floors balance the stones our souls carry. Flowers withered by bitter breath. Cold crawls over us and nibbles at our seams. We never knew lack until poverty found residency in our mouths. Despondency has been rattling the door's hinges. Notwithstanding that, tonight we're hosting a dinner to find out how we got here, how we have come to this house, come I see you, to further life or to end it. Who bribed us into deserting our lifeline? We asked all and sundry to come dine with us, a night that stretched for 26 years. We served organic suggestions that night, topped with rhetorical questions. These guests are not here to eat the plight of our life's stories, to hear how we are not living to go to heaven, but to not look at every meal as though it's the Last Supper. We all keep glancing at equality with faint smiles, trying to ignore how we became victimized by the spoils of a struggle. No one often reminds the once oppressed how tyrannical giants fall. So when fortune favors them, greed has them inflating, bursting beyond their bellies. Illusions of democracy attempt to open my mouth, but reality has this tongue feeling like a severed limb. There are gaps in this conversation of intellectual liberation that have our voices shifting as tectonic plates. Until for the time uttered his only words that evening, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Abruptly, labor shouted to capitalism. This forged long-run romance between us and progress is no longer glue that keeps this house together. You have redefined moral hazards, dealt a hand to hedge everything but the people. With a smug, capitalism retorted, "Don't feed on what you can't fund." The futurist put on his contact lens to comment. This house is on fire. All present are flooding it with emptiness, drenching every space with blood clots to save its foundation. Tip the scales. Sorrow has assaulted your lungs for far too long. Deflate into a readiness to flow. Teach the mind so the heart may preserve its lessons. Our minds are gifts. Earth acknowledges our presence. And so the next day, we spring cleaned, dusted off distrust, washed the years of betrayal off the walls, washed inequality off our skin, watched injustice flow out the baths, and see it drain stagnation's throat. To hear our own esophagus emphasize the echo of victories our stomachs are yet to clasp. Soak ourselves in knowledge from Urban Festival 2020, embracing our best ideals which await in plenty. We will refurnish every room with a lived experience, embedded in the sight of memory, not yet sung of us.
Thanks very much, Sean, for playing that that poem. That was Emma Mabie, a young South African lady who's a poet. She has rendered, I think, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 poems throughout the South African Urban Festival that we have been running throughout since the 1st of October. By the way, tomorrow is the last day of Urban Festival. In the morning, the Minister of Cooperative Governance, who is our political principal in the local government sector, will be closing the session in conjunction with the chairperson of the South African Cities Network, who's also here today and is the executive mayor of Buffalo City. So colleagues and everybody across the world, welcome. We are here in a session that is investigating how it is that we need to invest in cities so as to ensure that they continue to be green where they are green, and where it is that they're not green, they start initiatives of becoming green so as to be able to ensure a very equitable future. I am going to introduce three people, all of them at the same time. They are the three principals of the partnering organizations that are driving this initiative. The first is Deputy Minister Parks Tau. He is the current Deputy Minister of the Department of Cooperative Governance in South Africa. He is the former president of UCLG. He's the former president of the South African Local Government Association. He's also, importantly, a former practitioner in the city as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. Welcome, Deputy Minister Tau, and thanks very much for agreeing to be part and parcel of this high-level partnership.
Thank you very much, Tol, and good afternoon to you and to all the participants. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deputy Minister. The second person is my principal, my boss, in other words, Leo. Executive Mayor Xola Phakathi is the executive mayor of Buffalo City. Buffalo City is one of the 9 largest municipalities in South Africa. He is as well the council chairperson of the South African Cities Network. So he represents the South African Cities Network in that capacity. But also importantly, he sits in the executive committee, the National Executive Committee of the South African Local Government Association. So we are quite represented in one way or the other. And Councillor Phakathi, greetings to you. How are you?
Greetings to you, Stola. Greetings to the Deputy Minister Tau and all parties present in this session of this Friday afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask Pilasande to ensure that when you speak next, we can see you on video. I did give you some accolades and I indicated that you look young. So there's something right you are doing. Perhaps you'll find time to share with us what it is that you are doing. And then the last person is a person that I have admired from far. And I'm very happy to be interacting with Wanjira Matai, who is the Vice President as well as the Regional Director of the World Resource Institute. Wanjira, how are you?
I am really well. I'll soon turn my video on. I had to move to another location, but doing really well.
Okay, no, thanks very much to all three of you, and thanks again for joining us and really agreeing to share the platform with us and the audience that we have. I see the numbers are indeed increasing. We are currently sitting at 70. I'm told that we are oversubscribed for this, which is quite great because it means that the entire audience is a global audience. Deputy Minister Tau, you are the host. Can I hand over to you? You've got your 5 minutes of giving us a welcome to this. Thanks very much. Let me hand over to you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Tol, and good afternoon to all the friends and colleagues around this platform. I see many friends, colleagues from all over the world, and practitioners committed to transforming our cities into livable and sustainable cities. Now, Stola, as you would know, standard practice in the country is when you come to an event such as this, you prepare a very detailed, well-structured speech with protocol and so on. But because I'm amongst friends, I will send the speech to you for the record so that you can satisfy yourself that we actually did prepare for the event. But I thought I want to talk to us as friends, really, and fellow practitioners.
Yeah, it's a happy moment.
South Africa is going through a host of challenges with regards to our urban development trajectory. Like many cities throughout the world, our country is facing challenges that have to do with high levels of urbanization, the urbanization of poverty, a youth bulge in our cities, and therefore the pressure that our cities face. This is compounded by the economic realities of our country, precipitated amongst others by a credit rating downgrade, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the need to have a comprehensive response, therefore, as a country to all these challenges. So the cities having to play a pivotal role in the process of driving our reconstruction agenda as a country. And our reality is, as we're discussing the next phase of the implementation of our national urban policy, which is the integrated urban development framework, we'd have to factor these realities into account, and we'd have to be very bold and decisive in the sort of action that we put in place to ensure that our cities can respond and play their role in response to the current challenges that we face. We've certainly set ourselves as a country an objective of rebuilding our country at a much faster rate and a much faster pace, but more important, in a much more inclusive way, taking into account the spatial disparities in our country, the monofunctionality of our cities, the urban development challenges that we have in relation to whether it's mobility, access to water, sanitation, electricity, the sustainable use and deployment of those resources and other natural resources. We're going to have to respond in a very decisive way. And the integrated urban development framework is that particular platform that we have now as cities to respond to these challenges. It is therefore apt and possibly, whilst it is somewhat coincidental, that we're discussing the next phase of the implementation of the IUTF within this context. It is thus, amongst others, that we reached out to the World Resources Institute Ross Center for Sustainable Cities, Annie and his colleagues there, and through them also reached out to the Coalition for Urban Transitions to say, can we have a partnership? Can we have a partnership that reinforces the country's objectives, but it also contributes to the attainment of the new urban agenda and entrenching the principles of the new urban agenda in the South African overall agenda in terms of city development and growth. And we're excited that we are on the verge of signing a partnership that should enable us to reach out to many organizations that constitute part of the coalition, and in particular to the WRI in its broadest sense. Of course, the Ross Center, Annie, as our entry point, but the WRI in its broadest sense as partners in our process of redevelopment in the country. I'm looking forward to a partnership that has set great ambitions for achievement of sustainability in our development trajectory now for our cities. Certainly, that's not going to be an easy task. It will be complex, but I think that there is an appetite in the country to have a much more decisive set of actions to respond to our challenges. We cannot afford not to respond decisively. Levels of unemployment have increased exponentially. Levels of poverty have increased exponentially over the past few months. The pressure of our cities, their revenue base, the sustainable use of the resources at their disposal are going to be critical during this period. And we're saying to the WRI, to CUT, and other partners that we are looking forward to working with you in not only setting an agenda for implementation, but also partnering in the processes of implementation. And the next few weeks, I think, would be about consolidation, getting final approval of our implementation plan from Cabinet, and we'll have to roll up our sleeves and get down to working very hard to achieve what we've set out to achieve. Thank you very much. And Stola, I still do commit to send you the formal speech. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble with other people also.
I know that I'll speak to Toivo about it as well. But thanks very much, DM, Deputy Minister, for coming through. Ladies and gentlemen, when Deputy Minister speaks of the IUDF, it stands for the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is a policy instrument that South Africa has adopted to drive and navigate the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by the phenomena of urbanization. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the Executive Mayor of Buffalo City Metropolitan Municipality, who is as well the chairperson of the South African Cities Network and the Council of the South African Cities Network. Executive Mayor Phakathi, over to you. Thanks very much, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much to you, Program Director. Once again, greetings to the Deputy Minister and all parties present. Colleagues, for the first time in living history, we celebrate Urban October in the midst of uncertainty and volatility. But it is equally important for us to recognize that there are two other waves of disruption that have contributed to institutional instability of city government, namely the impact of climate change and financial instability. This confirms that as we celebrate progress achieved in shaping the morphology and of urbanization, but in South Africa and both in South Africa and across the world, there is yet still more to be done if we are to survive as a sector and as a people. There are at least three areas of impact that we'll have to contend with if we are to invest in green cities and in an equitable manner, which are as follows. One, the enhanced people mobility. Unless cities and towns are decongested, made safer for pedestrians and informal settlements are upgraded, it will be impossible to reap the urban dividend. Number two, equitable land tenure and inclusive settlement. Residents in informal settlements struggle to formalize their dwellings because of lack of access to affordable finance, insecure tenure arrangements, overpriced construction materials, and limited depth in the construction sector. Thirdly, capturing the dividend presented by technology and the digital revolution. The intersection of urbanization and economic productivity demonstrates the importance of place in a more globalized economy and labor market, which points to the importance of city-level strategies of investment and coordination. In my capacity as an executive mayor of one of the cities in South Africa, as well as on behalf of all my colleagues in urban governance, I would like to declare our support for the working partnership between COGTA, South African Cities Network, and the World Resource Institute as the collaborating partners in the implementation of the Integrated Urban Development Framework, IUDF, in order that we achieve the noble objectives of the district development model. I am convinced that the skills and expertise we're harnessing through the WRI will yield the priority outcomes that I have articulated above, because without achieving these developmental outcomes, our struggle against apartheid will have been in vain. We hope that our country's resolve to dismantle the legacy of 300 years of slavery, colonization, and apartheid will be achieved as speedily as possible and yet sustainably as necessary. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thanks very much, Executive Mayor, for that very pointed address and welcoming the partnership. Sean, if you don't mind, I would appreciate it if on the chat room, you could just put a brief profile of our speakers, starting from the panelists, that have spoken, because I don't want to shortchange anyone. So I'm gonna ask Wanjira to take over the podium and also take a stab at the 5 minutes of time that she has. Wanjira, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much for that and for your kind introduction. Delighted to be on this podium with all of you on such a lovely day launching this important program. I'm delighted also to be joined by you, Minister Tao. Really, thank you for your long partnership with us at WRI over the years. We're grateful for your leadership. And in many ways, this launch today is a culmination of so much work that has gone ahead. And Mayor Pakati, thank you too. Acknowledging the leadership of the Department of Cooperative Government, my own organization, WRI, our fearless leader, Ani Dasgupta, who's here, who drives our urban transformation work, and all the colleagues of CAT. Full credit goes to you today, and I just want to say congratulations. This is really great, the cusp of this launch. Distinguished guests, it is a timely launch because we are investing in cities for a green and equitable future. And this ought to be the highest priority of any government. And thank you, South Africa, for leading the way. We're living in very interesting times, of course, because the COVID pandemic has tragically exposed how vulnerable our cities are, and really the health and livelihood of people, key life support systems like water and food, and the economies that have been completely rattled and disrupted. All of these are multiplied by the great challenge we face, climate change, the floods, the food crises, the diseases, and sadly, the most vulnerable among us, and Mayor Pakati spoke about this group, are the hardest hit, particularly, as we all know, in our cities. In my own city, Nairobi, some of our informal settlements on a day-to-day basis, a lot of these people eke a living on a daily basis. And the minute the lockdowns came, how can they earn a living? And what do we do when so many of them are part of an informal economy that is completely untraceable by county and city authorities? We do have a once-in-a-generation opportunity, I think, to reset the trajectory of our growth. We know that as cities go, so goes the planet. And the signals that our cities send to the rest of the countries will incentivize or not transformative action. And that's why what we're doing is really important. We have to get on a new path. I loved the poem by Emma Mabie's, the clarity of that one that makes society stronger, society healthier, more equitable, and certainly more resilient. We have to seize the opportunity to transform how we understand, how we plan, how we finance, and how we respond to risks. And the economy, the health, and the climate crisis are all very integrated, and they find such devastating manifestation in our cities when they are most vulnerable. That's why I'm also really thrilled to be here today, Sithole. I'm happy because the partnership that we'll be launching is going to set the stage for South Africa to do just that. And no doubt it will inspire others to follow suit. We can see that around the world, governments are investing trillions in fiscal stimulus to help economies recover. Investing in the resilience of our cities has got to be front and center in that recovery. And so I'm also here to say that WRI Africa will be a strong ally with you. And as Parks has said, our new strategy is grounded in this bullish ambition for Africa's future, for sustainable development, and now especially building back better after this pandemic. One of the key pillars of our work, I'm happy to share, will focus on catalyzing a brand of Africa's urbanization that is inclusive, green, climate resilient. Africa is urbanizing faster than any other continent in the world, and we know that. But we are simply not seeing the sort of structural transformation that should accompany that growth, especially the transition to formal sector jobs. Now, what that means is that countries are not reaping enough of those benefits, and the economic and social benefits, that is, and that needs to change. The truth is that for us in Africa, there are real opportunities to forge this sort of development. And it's definitely why the development pathway and the opportunities that we are going to be talking about today have got to be our North Star. It's no secret at WRI that I'm a great fan of the Coalition of Urban Transitions program, because how WRI Africa here on the continent engages with our city leaders to change the way national governments look at the role and importance of cities is critical, and that will be central to how we work. South Africa is truly blazing a trail here, and we are grateful for your leadership. Just in closing, ladies and gentlemen, we know for sure that if we cannot change the way we do things, then we are doomed, simply. We cannot return to the old way of doing things. So initiatives like this one are ideas whose time has come. In her essay, The Pandemic is a Portal, Arundhati Roy said it best when she said that our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past, and refusing, quite frankly, to acknowledge that there is a rupture. But that rupture actually exists, and in the midst of that terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we've built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. And so I want to thank all of you for investing in cities for a green and equitable future, because that will be the change we need. Thank you very much for including us in this launch, and we are honored to be part of this partnership. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I really would like to thank Wanjira and all my three political leader principal panelists for this particular partnership. I think the only thing that I could say in response, unsolicited response, is that we dare not fail. In South Africa, we've been through this road of ensuring that we've got an instrument in place in the form of the IUDF. And I think for maybe 24 months, we were just caught and trapped in how do we practicalize it. So there is reason and meaning behind formulating these partnerships, both at a global level with institutions such as the WRI. At a local level, there are institutions that we are putting together that will harness and strengthen this partnership, but as well, and I suspect much more importantly, we've been arguing, you cannot do and implement urban development in space. It has to be at a local level where the term hits the road. So without further ado, thanks very much to all three of you. I hope you are going to remain. I see that there are questions that are being placed on the chat room already. One is asking if we think that the public, especially the youth, has confidence in the partnerships, in the ability of the partnerships to deliver, in light of the fact that perhaps previous partnerships have been skewed towards corporate interests. So that's a question that we will deal with as we go ahead. Right now, I would like to introduce the next speaker. Annie, you have about 7 minutes. Annie represents the CUT, the Coalition for Urban Transitions, which is part and parcel of the WRI-ROS Center for Sustainable Cities. I understand, Annie, that you've got a 5 minutes presentation, and immediately thereafter, I'm going to ask my panelists from Edgar, Peterse, Hastings Chikoko, Anthea Stevens, Tobisi Masinga, and Dom Boyle to be respondents to all that we have heard, whilst I am encouraging everybody to start placing questions, comments on the chat room so that we can bring all of those into a discussion so that we have a full discussion. So let me hand over to you, Annie, and yeah, the podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Atole. And Parks, you said it the best. I really feel we are among friends here. And more important, I feel we are among practitioners, as you said. So this is a fantastic moment for us. And Parks, to you, Mayor Prakati, Wanjira, thank you you set it up so nicely with your not only pointed remarks, but also inspiring words about this partnership. This is something I've been looking forward to. Parks, I just want to say one word without embarrassing Parks. that we've been working with Parks for a long time, since he was a mayor, in all many different important positions he's had, including head of one of the biggest city networks, and also advising us how to run the Ross Center. So Parks, it's a great moment that we have come to this partnership, which I'm absolutely looking forward to. I just want to say that this partnership wouldn't have happened without Stephanie, your help, and Setole, your support. I still remember the rainy day in London, where we sat together and discussed this partnership. Only in London a South African Indian can sit in an Armenian restaurant to discuss partnership of cities. So this is thanks to London, and also to the South African Cities Network. Without that, this would not happen. So really, thank you for making this happen. For me, this is a long time coming. Really appreciate it. This partnership, any partnership is good. This partnership, and I hope there are a lot of questions about this partnership, is critical for us for 3 reasons. Number one, we see globally, we work in a global environment. South Africa is a leader. South Africa has done things on local governance, what you're doing right now, your new plan. These are actually the leading edge of middle income countries. So what South Africa does, learns, succeeds, fails, is important for the whole world. And our job is would want to partner with you to learn from you and share it with the world. Second, I think what you have put in place in the plan, IDF, is ambitious. This making urbanization or urban development central to your growth trajectory and making cities work for everyone, for every income group, is critical for success. This is what we've been saying. So we want to actually be part of it, see any way we can support you, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And what Wanjira said, and the mayor said, and Parks, you said, this is a very special moment, very special kind of a delicate moment. We all want to get this moment right. It is difficult in many ways, but it also has opened up new political opportunities that didn't exist before. So making the right choices now is critical for going forward. So it couldn't be better, this timing of it, for us to have this partnership going forward. Can I have my slides, please? I really want to introduce very quickly to you the Ross Center. I head the Ross Center. I hope you can see the slides. Most probably you can't read it because I can't. But we work, the yellow dots in the map of the offices we have. We are a global organization. We work in about 120 cities across the world. But what I want to stress, our critical goal is to work with cities and partner with cities so that they can succeed in the long term. So succeed economically, create equity, be prosperous, and be resilient, and doing all this while they get to lower carbon. This is what we do across the world, and we have a relatively large team distributed all over. Leo, who's one of our director of strategies here, Roger, who's the director of urban development, is here in this panel. I also want to introduce, more importantly, the Coalition for Urban Transition, which I have the privilege with Mark Watts to lead. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. No, thank you. The coalition is a really interesting organization that was created during at the Paris COP. And it's, as you can see, I won't read all of them. They are leading organizing cities across the world that have come together to actually answer one single question. We were in Paris, we saw cities were a very important part of the climate conversation. But we also discovered through research that national government policies for cities were very important for city success. So we put together this coalition to answer one question. What are the right kind of national policies needed in every country, different policies that will make cities succeed? I'm very privileged to have many people of our coalition here at this particular meeting. Nick Godfrey, who is our director, is here. Pandora is here. But more importantly, our partner in South Africa, ACC, you'll hear from Edgar in a minute. Edgar is here. I think Anton is here in this, and so is Andy. So we have a very strong partnership with South Africa. Parks Thao plays a very important role in the coalition. So this is what I want to do today in next 3 minutes. Next slide, please. I want to share with you an example of something coalition produced, the last thing coalition produced, actually, with a co-author from ACC, Anton Cartwright. is we put together the evidence to why in the recovery that's being discussed globally because of the pandemic, why the cities, the economic case cities was important, or what was the case for it. And this is just an example to share with you what kind of this partnership will bring. Next slide, please. Why did we do this? For this reason. For today, till about all countries, if you put together all countries, the money they've pledged for recovery, $12 trillion has been pledged by countries together. $12 trillion. It's not billion, it's not million, it's $12 trillion have been pledged. In that pledging, those cities are pretty much the epicenter of this crisis, both economically, people who have lost jobs, and health-wise, people who are sick. Yet, what is shocking to see in this recovery, very little of this recovery is actually green today. And very even further, only 7% of the recovery investments are actually geared towards cities. Now, this is troubling, meaning where the problem is and where the money is going to go may not be right. So hence we put together this evidence working with a global team to show what exactly would the recovery look like. Next slide, please. And we came to, from the evidence, there are clearly 7 sectors that are the leading sectors where investment will do following, which all countries say they need. They need to create jobs immediately. They need investment that will provide prosperity for the long term. They need to be green, and they need to create resilience. All these investments we articulated and identified from a global research, from clean mobility, building renewable, building energy efficiency of building, renewable energy, active transport, nature-based solution, waste and resources, and R&D. Came up in this research as the one that has the biggest bang for the buck for recovery and for long-term recovery and creating jobs. And of course, along with this cross-cutting investment of fiscal reform, governance reform, and financial reform. It is great to see the executive mayor already mentioned actually a few of these sectors as critical sectors to recovery. The point I want to point out now, this is why CUT and the Ross Center together can bring value to this partnership, because what Ross Center does is actually works in these sectors in a city, because these sectors are connected. When you implement them, for example, clean mobility, renewable energy are connected. So how do you help cities to bring a comprehensive strategy to implement that? This is what the Ross Center does everywhere. Next slide, please. The main criticism we hear is that these can't be done because they don't create jobs. We need to create jobs now. We need to do shovel-ready projects. The actual truth is this is what Coalition for Urban Transition brings, is actual evidence of what actually does create job and what does not create job, or at least less job. I mean, look at the amount of fund that has gone to fossil fuel related things. For example, even look at clean mobility. This is actually very interesting. Road construction or repaving road is the top item in recovery investments everywhere in the world, United States to India, everywhere. Repaving Nova is the most popular thing. It's the easiest thing to do. But you can see that even that doesn't create as much job people think as building investment in EV and transportation. So point I'm making, our job, we feel, is to bring global evidence to the policy making. Next slide, please. Is to the South African context. Of course, the context is very different, and I hope Edgar and I will talk about that. But what South Africa does is critical for the world, for the reasons you can see that it's half of the global emission and GDP, these 6 countries together. Hence, we focusing on these 6 countries as we, in a new research we're actually doing. And the last slide I want to say is that our evidence, can you go ahead, please? Our evidence shows, this is early evidence of a paper we're writing right now with colleagues in South Africa, that if South Africa, this is what Park Sao was saying, if South Africa got these investment right of national recovery and actually focused on cities, because that's where a lot of the people are, a lot of the impact is, the impact from that is actually multiple times. Of course, this will be refined and gone, but the path, the economic case for investing in low carbon development in cities is actually overwhelming. And this is the kind of work we want to do with Parks and the team and the South Africa Cities Network, and I can't really get to the actual practical step of doing some things together with you, Parks Lau and the team. Thank you very much, Atole.
Thanks very much, Annie. This is quite overwhelming. I mean, if nothing, I think it's very scary, but I suspect that it also propels us to some action in one way or the other. And I think this is in part the reason why we are clear that government alone is not going to be able to deal with this. Government needs to get into very meaningful partnerships with civil society, with business, but as well as with organizations such as yours. So I think these last slides that you have just shared with us here are a clear indication that I think we are not on the wrong path, but we just have to be steady, make very calculated mistakes, but make significant progress nonetheless. So Annie, thanks very much for that brief presentation. I stand guided, Stephanie, and you can chat to me on the side. I suspect we are going to be sharing these presentations that have been made in this particular session. I think, Sean, I think that's what we are going to do. Colleagues, I see that people have now started to put a number of comments on the chat room, and I'm hoping someone is going to help me to bring those comments to bear when the panelists speak. So the first person that's going to speak is Edgar. Edgar hails from the African Center for Cities, and I think, as you would have heard, he works with quite a number of organizations, including the WRI and CUT. Importantly, though, I must say, Edgar was very instrumental when we started to pull together the Integrated Urban Development Framework. He was part and parcel of the lead panelists that were propelling us to put together a compelling story to government about why it was important that we harness what the globe had offered in the form of the emergence of a new urban agenda at the time, and localize it and give it the local flavor, which is what now the Integrated Urban Development Framework is. And I suspect, Edgar, at this point in time, both yourself, myself, and everybody that has been involved in the IUDF, we are now left with the thorny problem of how do we practicalize this. Let me hand over to you, Edgar, and ask the question: how can South Africa invest in cities in order to achieve this low carbon equitability in a post-COVID-19 recovery environment? Edgar, I'll hand over to you. And colleagues, if you want to have a look at who Edgar is, go to the chat room. It's been placated there. Edgar, let me hand over to you. You also have your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Atole. And I'm gonna cause the organizers and the curators of this fantastic event some gray hairs, because I'm not going to answer your question. I want to tell a different story, because
That's
I kind
fine.
of,
That's
you know,
fine.
reflected on the IUDF and the process, and this very auspicious and very significant moment today, where I guess, you know, sort of different worlds that I'm involved with at least are coming together and intersecting. And I want to put on my South African hat in particular, and I want to, if you will, as an expression of the friendship and the engagement, share some family secrets to our international partners. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the dark side of the South African urban policy community, or more generally, the development community. And what I mean by this is that we've got a couple of quirks and we've got a couple of pathologies. And as we embark on this relationship going forward, it's maybe a good moment before that MOU is signed to kind of give you a sense of what you're letting yourself in for and what the kind of demands are that we may be placing at your feet. So the first point to make is that, you know, we suffer from quite an acute form of OCD. We're absolutely obsessed with integrated planning. And in a way, you know, sort of in a talk, discussion I had with Cocta a couple of months ago, when I reflected on this stems from the fact that our transition happened just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, just in the wake of Rio in 1991. And we were grappling with the world that is coming to terms with the spread of multi-party democracy across Africa. When we wrote our constitution, we took the best of the human rights tradition and integrated development thinking traditions, and it's all embedded in our fantastic constitution. But the pragmatism, the pragmatics of rule, of governing, of statecraft was deeply infused with imperatives of reintegrating into a neoliberal world. And so this sort of obsession with integrated planning, which comes from that moment, also connects up with an obsession, I guess, with being comprehensive. You know, we want to make sure all the bases are covered. And that, and on the other hand, limited resources and a kind of neoliberal managerialist mindset means we often struggle with priorities and trade-offs. This is something that is tough for us. So if you read any of our policies across any sector, it's one of the best in the world. It says all the right things, all the evidence, super sophisticated arguments. But when we've got to translate that into where do you start and how do you sequence things, we struggle. We really, really struggle. The other sort of family trait that is worth mentioning is that we kind of struggled with the idea that we're no longer predominantly a rural population, that we are predominantly urban. And until the very last election, just a few years ago, the ruling party in South Africa, which of course is the sort of most significant political force, the African National Congress, has had rural development as its #1 manifesto priority for every single election, which is, you know, of course, very important because poverty is deepest and most acute in rural South Africa. But the point is that it also reflects a certain ideological outlook on the world as to where the solution for poverty and inequality lies. And so when in 2012 in Lekgotla, there was an extended cabinet Lekgotla, there was this remarkable event that happened. The Statistician General, Pali Lekgotla, presented a report on migration into Gauteng and Cape Town. And in that same extended Lekgotla that the president convened at the time, there was also a report from a UN Habitat meeting where the minister reported, oh, they wanted to know what's our national urban plan, because this is all the rage. This is what everyone is talking about around the world. And I kind of had to embarrassingly admit, we don't really have one in South Africa. And in that cabinet meeting in December 2012, the president instructed the relevant ministers for us to get our arse in gear and to get a national urban policy. And that's the origins of the IUDF. And I was then asked to be part of an expert panel to support an interministerial committee to work on this from 2013 to 2016. And I'm kind of mentioning that because, you know, this is going to be the entry point. And one of the things we tried to do in that body of work was to deal with this question of our inability to prioritize, our inability to want to do everything and not quite knowing how to sequence. And if the chair will indulge me, I want to read one quote from the IUDF, which was our attempt to try and rectify that particular blind spot in our makeup. And the quote goes as follows. There's 4 strategic goals in the IUDF, and these goals inform the priority objectives of the 9 policy levers, which are premised on an understanding, and this is our attempt at sequencing. 1, integrated urban planning forms the basis for achieving integrated urban development, which follows a specific sequence of urban policy actions. 2, integrated transport that informs 3, targeted investments into integrated human settlements, underpinned by 4, integrated infrastructure network systems, and 5, efficient land governance, which all come together to trigger economic diversification and inclusion. And 7, empowered communities, and all of the above demand effective 8th, governance, and finally, financial reform to enable and sustain these policy actions. So the sort of key to understand the IUDF is, 1 is it's a framework that is actually about government learning to speak to itself coherently across the 3 spheres of government and across the sectors about what it understands the urban transition is, what the priorities are, and how to restructure existing investments to achieve these particular outcomes. Fast forward very quickly to 2019, and we now sit with a new medium-term strategic framework, the end of state capture, a new political regime, the completion of the National Spatial Development Framework, the introduction of the District Development Management Model, and as we're kind of wrapping our heads around what all of that means refracted through the IUDF, COVID-19 hits, right? And so what COVID, of course, has done is that it's effectively blown the hinges off policy orthodoxy. And now everyone knows that we have to get a lot more serious and urgent about how we connect SDG 11, 9, which is innovation and industrialization, and 13, which is climate. And cities, of course, at the heart of the story, as the CUT report suggests. So our big questions at the tail end of 2020 is, how do we recover and create jobs, 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 as many jobs as possible? And how, secondly, do we best unleash city economies to drive a green economic strategy that is labor generative? And finally, what's the best ways to optimize new political and regulatory opportunities? For example, the fact that cities can now become independent power producers. And of course, these are all the kinds of questions that the CUT and WRI is grappling with all the time. But I guess as we walk this journey into the future, and we've got to navigate the complex political economy and pathologies that are sort of at the DNA level of our makeup as South Africans, it's going to be important that we kind of, we have pretty direct conversations, and we kind of pick very carefully what are the things that we can work on. And hopefully now you can go into this partnership with your eyes wide open, and we can have a brilliant set of engagements, and we can in fact come up with ideas and responses that are impactful and will dramatically alter the operating framework for urban development in South Africa. So thanks to our international partners. I hope you're not going to run for the hills after this, but I thought it would be useful for you to have a more grounded sense of just what you're letting yourself in for. And we're most grateful for the opportunity to engage. Thanks, Sithole.
Thanks a lot, Edgar. I mean, nice choice of words. COVID has blown the hinges out of whatever policy framework that we have had. Secondly, Annie and colleagues at WRI, we love conversations in South Africa. So the partnership is not going to be something that's going to be dictated. There's going to be a plethora of engagements, and you're going to have to bear with us because we all have opinions. But I suspect they're all well-intended. Our intention is to make sure that we do things and we do them in an impactful manner. Of course, we understand that there is pressure as well, but I think be ready for the conversations. There's going to be lots and lots of debates, and this is not just between the partners in the IUDF, including yourselves. I mean, imagine when we have to have engagements at a city level, at a provincial level, at a national level, as well as with business, with civil society. So hang 10. I mean, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but I suspect that it's going to have its own results. So the next person is Hastings. Hastings is a regional director, C40 in Africa. And Hastings has a lot of, at least observations that he has done in South Africa, but a lot of experience in the African continent. Hastings, what are we to learn as we prepare to anchor this partnership?
Sithole, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. And first, I'd just like to express my delight to be in this pre-launch or pre-launch event of a partnership, especially a partnership that is supporting green recovery in South African cities and in South Africa as a whole. You know, as a partner to the Coalition for Urban Transition, we at C40, we supporting South Africa's commitment to a green recovery, and we really look forward to supporting you in this journey to supporting the partnership. To begin with, this partnership is very, very timely for us because at the global level, C40 mayors have this very week, actually released a joint statement on green and just recovery that pretty much highlights what C40 cities are doing and should be doing to achieve green recovery. Going through the mayor's statement, I sensed that the mayors are deeply concerned that, I think Annie has actually also mentioned this, that only a small percentage of an estimated $15 trillion in international COVID stimulus is currently committed to green initiatives. What this means is that almost all of the current COVID stimulus funding is propping up old and polluting economies, same old story. And that prevents us from keeping global heating below 1.5 degrees. To me, what I see from this, from the global mayors is that is a strong message that the most significant test of any government's commitment to climate action right now is where it is directing COVID stimulus funding for recovery. We need to begin a decade of ambitious, inclusive climate action to create a new normal at all levels, cities, provinces, nations, as well as at the continent level. So with this strong appeal from the C40 mayors and coming down to South Africa situation and coming down to this partnership, C40 is advocating for a new green, kind of like a Green New Deal that I believe is relevant to South African cities as well. Through this commitment, C40 cities, including the 5 metros in South Africa, are looking at working hand in hand with other spheres of governments on a number of things that which I believe this partnership will help accelerate. First is to protect mass transit from collapsing while promoting zero emissions mobility. This will involve relooking at the transport technologies that we're using and the way our cities are planned and the structural transformation that we need to achieve that. Maybe secondly, is green recovery should also improve basic services, especially water and sanitation and access to not just energy, but clean energy. The issue of basic services is one area where we got exposed during COVID-19. So we need to work on this. When we talk about clean energy in South Africa, C40 cities in South Africa, the metros, the 4 metros in South Africa have been working for the past 2.5 years, looking at the building policies, regulations and codes, and revising them to achieve net zero carbon buildings in South Africa. We need to now take that forward and support these cities, of course, with an enabling environment at national level, and build the requisite capacity to implement and enforce these building codes, these policies, and these regulations. Let us look closely at the opportunities presented by the amendments of the Electricity Regulations Act 4 of 2006 on new generation capacity. That's an opportunity for us. That's an opportunity for South Africa. That's an opportunity for the metros in South Africa. And the president included that in his State of the Nation address for 2020. We must also focus on supporting green startups. I think there was a talk from Annie's presentation about green jobs. We need to look at green startups and promote green entrepreneurs, creating green jobs. Looking at this statement from the global mayors, there is, C40 mayors believe that a green and just recovery could create over 50 million good and sustainable jobs by 2025 across the cities in the C40 network and their supply chain. To ensure that we can do this in South Africa, we must, through this partnership and through the work of the Coalition for Urban Transition, accelerate our work on just transition. We have covered some ground in South Africa on just transition, but we need to do more and we need to do it faster. And because of this, C40 is starting a program in South Africa in the coming 2 months to support the 5 metros in South Africa on just transition with generous support from the Open Society Foundation. And we'll be looking for opportunities to collaborate with this partnership to ensure that C40 cities in South Africa are effectively engaged in the just transition conversations and the just transition work at national level, but also want to facilitate a meaningful and constructive collaboration between C40 cities and labor unions on low carbon pathways that take into account or take into consideration the interests of workers, take into consideration inclusion so that we don't leave anyone behind. Finally, let me just talk a little bit on financing. I think we also need to, besides what has been said, we need to seek more innovative and green financing options in South Africa. Globally, 12 C40 cities, including some metros in South Africa, are calling on seat and pension funds with over $295 million in total assets to divest from fossil fuels. That's the way to go. That's what our green recovery should include. So with that, let me just close by simply pledging our support and willingness to work with this partnership to complement our efforts in the implementation of the IUDF and the green recovery actions in South African cities. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Hastings. And I think, as I did indicate earlier, this partnership that we're talking about today is focused on the WRI, but it's not the only thing. It's not the only partnership that we're bringing into the room. I think we're trying to crowdsource, if that's the correct term. We're trying to crowdsource the response to South Africa's urban development challenges. And so having worked with C40, we will want to continue to work with the likes of C40 and many other organizations that will bring value to the effort that we are all trying to ensure that it becomes qualitative in response. I think the most important principle that all of us must take, colleagues, from this conversation is that government has taken a position that alone it cannot solve problems. So let's try to be as inclusive as possible in the problem solving that we have. So thanks very much, Hastings. And at this point in time, colleagues, I can just like whisper into your ears, between myself and Anthea, we are supposed to be in a meeting with National Treasury. Treasury is having a discussion with, I think, the 21 largest municipalities in South Africa, looking at taking the pulse on how COVID has impacted upon them. So hush, hush. We are not supposed to be in this meeting. But anyway, Anthea, from your side, National Treasury, your National Treasury's support to the green and inclusive COVID recovery program. What barriers are we currently facing? You sit at the helm and at the macro of how cities and the towns in South Africa are sharing with you the difficulties that have emanated as a result of COVID. And just before Anthea speaks, colleagues, I just need to say that Deputy Minister Dawi has just stepped out of the room. He will be back. But anyway, Anthea, let me hand over to you. You also have your 5 minutes. Thanks.
Thanks, Sithole. Thanks, colleagues, and greetings to everyone around the world who's listening.
Greetings, Anthea. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Well, we shouldn't be here, should we, Sithole? But anyway, we're sharing, in the spirit of sharing family secrets, that Edgar, the sort of environment of intimacy that Edgar created when he started speaking. You've shared some more family secrets, Sithole, and I'm going to also share a couple of family secrets with the audience here, which I think is only fit as we start a new partnership. It's good to know what skeletons are in the cupboard. So the previous speakers have set out the challenges that we need to face in our recovery to COVID and ensuring that recovery is green and addresses issues of equity. So I'm not going to do that. What we have here, I think, in this on this panel and in this sort of virtual room today, we have a lot of allies for cities. We have cities themselves and we have city allies. And I think, you know, that's the importance of that is underscored by the fact that we expect so much from our cities in terms of delivering on the growth and the recovery agenda, which has been set out by the Deputy Minister, by the Executive Mayor and others. The research report that was produced by the WRI and the Centre for the Coalition for Urban Transitions has highlighted a number of cross-cutting reforms that we need to address. And it's those cross-cutting reforms, Sithole, that I think speak to some of the great barriers that we do face. They've highlighted the need for issues around governance, such as enabling policies, the need for fiscal instruments that support the green transition, and the need for financing that is resilient to some of these transitions. But we also have, as you and others have spoken to, Edgar himself as well, we have an enabling policy environment. We have the support of policy, and through partnerships like with the WRI, we're able to harness critical evidence to ensure that our policy is evidence-led. But family secret number 3 for the meeting is that we are not the best implementers of policy. We have good enabling environments and good policy, but we struggle, and I think it's probably the worst kept secret. We struggle with the implementation of policy, and it's that we need to get right. We know when we look at fiscal reports in Treasury, we see serious underspend of capital budgets, particularly at the city level. We're facing one of the worst fiscal situations at the moment, and we absolutely cannot be affording to have that underperformance on fiscal spend. We also know that we don't really look after what we have very well. We don't invest sufficiently in our assets. So we have a situation where we have aging and very poorly maintained infrastructure, which leads to suboptimal performance and delivery of services. Huge figures of water loss in some municipalities. And then institutionally, these agendas of integration, of mainstreaming, of collaboration, they're ones we struggle with. Integration is a challenge for us. The IUDF is an agenda for integration, as is the agenda for responding to climate change, for inclusivity and addressing issues of equity. So how do we grapple with those? And I think that's the sort of heart of the point I want to make, is that we kind of know what we need to do. We know what our priorities are. They're set out very clearly by previous speakers and in reports, but it's the how, which is where we typically tend to trip up. So one of the things that's been mentioned a couple of times, Hastings mentioned it as well, is looking at addressing issues of energy security. And so in the role that National Treasury is trying to provide by creating a space in the fiscal levers that we have to integrate environmental priorities, there's a vast amount of work that's happening, and quite remarkable that's happening in Treasury at the moment, to integrate, to better understand the role that National Treasury can play in supporting a green and equitable future. So there's a lot of work that's happening on that side, but simply on providing and looking to provide the policy clarity on how municipalities can embark on procuring power from independent power producers. So that's something that we're busy working on at the moment. But fundamentally, we've identified 4 key priorities. One is ensuring that we have the spatial integration in the urban plans that we're working with. The second is ensuring that we have the capability and the capacity in our system to deliver on those spatial plans through well-prepared, properly financed projects. And then lastly, it's also about integrating the priorities for responding to climate change into plans, ensuring that our plans and our budgets are aligned with priorities for long-term spatial transition. But I think the key thing that we need to do is to kind of work together to bridge the silos, the institutional silos, through partnerships like the one being launched today, and to do justice to what citizens expect us to deliver on in terms of some of the ambitions that were set out quite poignantly in the poem that opened the session. So Sithole, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot, Anthea, and thanks for coming through. I'll meet you on the other side of this meeting. So now I just want to say something before the next 2 colleagues speak on. So we are here establishing a partnership. Predominantly, we are led by government. And one of the things that we have been bemoaning is how it is, at least in the last 10 years, we have just generally failed to partner meaningfully with civil society, as well as with people that are in the innovation space. And I'm thinking there of Dom in PwC. So before I say anything, Tobisi, you will see in Annie's presentation, one of the slides, one of the things that he makes reference to is the whole issue of green buildings. And in it, he also talks about how the retrofitting of erstwhile old buildings that are reliant on fossil fuels is actually something that can be exploited to create new jobs. What's your take on that?
Thank you, Sithole. Well, before I even answer your question, we're at a time where climate change is no longer a token words for votes at a random class project or a myth amongst communities. We are all living through it. We have seen devastating adverse effects through sea levels rising, coastal erosion, droughts, famine, infrastructural damage, and settlement flooding, not to mention a few. That's the call to action to all of us is what will we do? What will you do? Secondly, we have had the outbreak of the current pandemic and how it has affected cities, urban metabolism, urban culture, economics, mental health, and the environment. From an environmental point of view, it has had some positive contributions. There's been less traffic, which we've seen less carbon emissions being emitted. Urban heat islands have reduced, and air quality has improved in some parts of the world. So the question is, how do we improve? And the simple answer that has come from a lot of the colleagues at the fore is partnerships, relationships, collaborative planning approaches through incrementalism. As a council, our view and our objective is to look at green buildings, but beyond just green buildings. It's to further into partnerships into green precincts, green regions, and green cities. And that can be done from our three pillars, which is advocacy, educating, and certifying. So from an educational point of view, all government stakeholders, their mandate is capacity building and skills transfer. So it starts at grassroots levels for everybody to be able to implement. In the spirit of good practice, that is why we're currently busy with a number of projects with many government institutions that we've taken partnerships with. From an educational point of view, we've got projects and programs and courses through CPD courses. We advocate for partnerships. We're currently advocating for green infrastructure partnerships with Infrastructure SA. We're continuing to have other conversations with other stakeholders. We have the C40s, C40 cities building programs that is currently under the way, and we one of the stakeholders in there. We have a membership arrangement and an MOU with GDOD, and we are assisting there with policy alignments. We're working with Mpumalanga province and Limpopo. And one of the key things in this age, especially coming from the question of the building and construction sector, there's a project that the DTIC is working on in the greening of the construction sector in utilizing timber. And this stigma, the biggest issue is the stigma. That's the biggest challenge that we face, that timber is seen as a primitive way of building. For many people in South Africa, when you look at other European first world countries, timber is actually a futuristic way of building into the future. It's more sustainable, it emits less carbons, and there's more circulation of air in those type of structures. So we're looking at how innovative ways that we can do that transition into building with timber. And of course, we're doing some work with DEF as well in green building advocacy and the greening of the tourism program as well. So stemming from the 7 priorities of national government, and some of the key challenges and opportunities are 1, green infrastructure, and the greening of building materials. If we can find better ways in partnering up and working together in finding the right type of materials for building buildings, that would set us afar from where we are right now. And going back to buildings and retrofitting, there's a project that the DTIC is doing in terms of greening industrial parks. And we're involved in that in trying to find the right mechanisms, the tools, and the research ways in how to green these buildings. And it's also a sensitive topic because it further relates to heritage buildings, because we have the Heritage and Resources Act, but there are ways in how these buildings can be turned into a useful facility that is less harmful to the environment and will benefit the future people and the future progression of cities. It further feeds into the circular economy, which is something that we're all looking towards in how do we create a positive change. I think the biggest closing remark that I wanted to add was that during this time, it is important that we relook how we do business, relook the way we think, and relook at our approaches and methodologies, because change is inevitable. The idea here is that if you're still buying a plastic bottle to have a drink, you are part of the problem. And there has never been a better time to go green, invest in green, and be part of the green movement. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tobias. Just before you run away. So what happened to expanding the green buildings agenda into the African continent? Are you still guys working on that? Have you been in touch with C40, for instance? Have you expanded your network in such a manner that it also has touch points with the likes of the WRI, UCLG Africa, and any other? I'm leaving that. I'm just throwing that out. We can have a side discussion about it. It's something that I've been yearning for, because I think there's lots of opportunities that can be exploited in the green buildings agenda that could then advance the same agenda that through the IUDF and many other initiatives that we are trying to push. So in so saying, Domboy, what chances are there for public-private partnerships in this gap, right?
Okay. Yes.
Dom?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay, yeah?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, so I think I'm the last member of the panel. Well, I am the last member, and I think I'm the only private sector representative. So unlike Edgar, we don't have any dark secrets in the private sector. We're a very transparent. So I'm afraid I don't have anything to share on that front. But I just so I do represent. So I do represent PwC. I'm a member of our Sustainable Cities team in the UK, having spent 4 years in South Africa. I came back last year in our cities team in Cape Town. And my other role, or the other role that I'll speak to in this, is as a member of the Future Cities South Africa Consortium, which is a donor-funded project funded by the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. And we're about a year into delivery, so I'll speak a wee bit about that as well. And the third role that I have, which is not a real role, but it's just the fact that I'm also from Glasgow, so which we all know has a very important conference coming up. So I have a personal stake in making sure that we outdo Paris. So I'll just leave that there. So yeah, I guess from a PwC point of view, what I wanted to talk about is our view on net zero and how cities get to net zero. And I think, like all members of this panel and probably participants as well, we believe in the power of cities. We believe that cities are fundamentally important in getting to net zero, as 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. And I guess the question is how, as Anthea said, how do we get there? And I think even over the course of the last decades, we've realized a big shift from here's the overall carbon emissions of cities to forming an evidence base, understanding what the institutional enablers are. So the evidence base has really come on, and organizations like C40 and CDP have helped with reporting and with understanding which sectors specifically emit the most. So we now know that the sectors that we have to tackle, as set out in the cut report, which Annie presented, are things like retrofitting buildings, insulation in colder countries like the UK, renewable energy, transport, and things like agriculture as well, obviously, are a big part of it. But because of the scale of city emissions, we kind of know which are the big sectors that we have to tackle as urban players. The institutional enablers are also key, and things like ensuring that funding and finance are available are really key. And a lot of the speakers on this panel have spoken to this already. Anthea talked about how fiscal spend isn't even happening, but how do we, once we do get to a stage where cities are able to spend and do have the business plans ready to spend on green projects, how do we ensure that there is more funding and finance forthcoming? And I think Hastings also spoke about the importance of green and blended finance. But the third area, so that's evidence base, I think has come on, institutional enablers, ongoing, but the third area is technical delivery. And Anthea mentioned this as well, the how, and Mtobisi talked about the green building materials as a good example. And I think that's where we're focused in understanding, sure, cities actually know how to get to net zero. The cities that we're working with in South Africa are ambitious and they're competent and they know what to do, but it's a lot of work. Writing business cases for anything from an emissions zone through to rail or IPPs, mini grids. These things take years and years to come through, and they take a lot of technical work. So I think our focus is on that delivery gap as PwC. it's all very, very well. We kind of know where we're going, but how do we bridge that delivery gap? And yeah, I guess that kind of brings me on to Future Cities South Africa, which is a technical assistance project funded by the FCO. And we are, it's not just PwC, it's an alliance of, so PDG, Palmer Development Group, Zutari, VPUU, that's Violence Prevention Through Urban Upgrading, OCL, the Open Cities Lab, and the Asandla Institute. So these are all mainly South African entities who all play in the urban space. And we run, I'm not going to go through all 5 projects that we run, but the 5 projects we're involved in are all quite innovative projects. These are not kind of easy projects to deliver. And we're working with the cities of Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town on quite technical questions like how do you roll out an entire data strategy for the city? So moving away from a kind of traditional city view of an IT department to thinking about data rather and how you treat all aspects of data. And we're working with the city of Johannesburg on understanding how the 4th Industrial Revolution will impact transport there. So how will new technologies impact industries that are still quite traditional, such as freight and minibus taxis. And we're working with the city of Durban on transit-oriented development, which is deeply complex. It may not be an innovative technology, but it is an innovative way of structuring government so that you don't think just about land, housing and transport, but you think about where people live and how they get around. So those technical projects are our main focus for the next two and a half years. And also this year, we've done about 20 separate projects in the response to COVID, and our partners at the Foreign Office were very flexible and worked with the cities and ourselves to try and understand what we could do to just get all hands on deck and try to respond to COVID. And some, I won't go through the different projects, but some of the stuff we've done, such as building a WhatsApp portal in Cape Town so that informal settlement residents could text if their water supply went out, I think have made a real difference in the COVID period. So yeah, I mean, I guess to summarize, we do think that there's a big technical gap. As a young consortium, Future Cities wants to be a part of that. PwC also wants to be a part of that, but in the Future Cities side, I think we see our role as a technical delivery partner, but we also massively respect the institutional players that are in this space. That includes COCTA, CSP, CUT, and many others that are trying to roll out the IUDF and work on the institutional enablers that we need. Some of our consortium members, including our team leader, came from CSP. So we are very much a South African urban program. But we look forward, I think, over the next couple of years that we're around to working with some of the people on this panel. So thanks again for the opportunity to speak, and looking forward to working together in the future.
Thanks a lot, Tom Boyle. Colleagues, we don't have a lot of time. I mean, I know that in terms of the program, at this point, we were supposed to be left with about 30 minutes, but we are far away from that. We're actually left with about 7 minutes. Tom Boyle, there's a question that was posed by Vector Projects at some point. It says, do you think that the public, especially young people, can have a real confidence that the meaning of these partnerships will deliver something? And it's not just corporates. It's not just corporates like PwC and I wish in your response, you are not corporate. You're just like yourself. Mm. Whatever that means, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really fair question. And I personally, I think I'm lucky enough to work in a job that has purpose. And whether I represent a corporate or a government or myself, the key is to try and get to net zero and to reduce our emissions as a world. I do think we need more representation. I saw that question, and I think it's a very fair point. And a lot of what we're trying to do in this program is to ensure that the outcomes that we deliver are very much inclusive, and that we mainstream inclusion, especially gender inclusion, throughout our program. But unfortunately, I am a white middle-class male, and I do work for a corporate, and there's only so much that I can say, but I can't understand some of the experiences that others have had, either on this panel or elsewhere, and I wouldn't want to pretend to.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dom. Edgar, there's a, I don't know if Edgar is still here. I'm not sure if I can still see him. There's a question that Edgar was trying to respond to William Roderick. It had something to do with migration as part and parcel of the IUDF. Edgar, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so do you want to just deal with that? I also made a comment that I wasn't quite sure what the question really was that came from WR. So if William Roderick is still here, perhaps, I don't know, but Edgar, you might have picked that question up.
Sure. Yeah, so now the question was whether there's explicit reference and engagement with the phenomena of climate migration as part of the IUDF, and whether it's a more traditional understanding of migration. Yeah, so I just explained in my response in the Q&A that, the South Africa, as far as I know, the South African government doesn't collate data that passes the different reasons for migration that includes climate impacts or events as a category. So we wouldn't have that kind of data, but of course, what the IUDF was trying to do was to create a much stronger anticipatory capacity in planning across municipalities in South Africa. And in that way, migratory flows and the differential flows to different provinces is factored in. But it would be fair to say that we don't have a particularly fine-grained understanding, in part because, of course, the census is only every 10 years now. So it's quite hard to understand all of the volatility in between the census. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks. I see that my panelists in the form of Wanjira and Councillor Phakathi are still here. And I'm just wondering if I could just not give you each perhaps a minute stab at what you might have heard as reflections. Wanjira, your light is quite bad. Is it dark in Nairobi?
It is dark, it is.
Is it? Oh, okay. Okay, no, that's fine. So
we'll do the best we can.
Okay, so Wanjira, just in 1 minute, just a reflection of what has happened today. And by the way, there was also a comment from Dr. Abwe. Okay, no, he was just saying that he had joined from Tanzania. That was then. I don't think he had a specific question. And Sean, if there's any questions that I should be paying attention to, please just share them with me. Otherwise, Wanjira, just go ahead.
Thank you, Sithole. I mean, it's been amazing to listen to everybody, but the clear thread for me, first of all, I've just been thinking about how much we absolutely have to partner with government for transformation to happen. We cannot scale or bring about any transformative change if we don't engage local government, county governments, national governments. And this is really, for me, one of the biggest highlights of this. We have a lot of good ideas floating around in many places, but if they are not anchored in a strong partnership, in the political economy, understanding how decisions are made in the environments where we work, then we will not make real change happen. That's the first thing. The second thing is the urgency for inclusion, that we have to be very deliberate about the role of women and the way we grow our cities and youth and engagement of youth. And then, of course, those who are most economically disadvantaged, that if we don't evolve our cities to include those, then who are we building these cities for? Because when we get the shocks that come, we have to marshal all our resources to support those most vulnerable. And so resilience is got to be the center of what we do in our cities work. So those two for me are really clear takeaways. Thanks.
Thanks, Wanjira. Councillor Phakathi, are you still there? I see you're connected, and I'm not sure if you're still here. Okay, I don't think he's here. Annie?
Thank you, Sithole. I just first of all, I want to thank everyone, but I thought Edgar did a very good job in his typical way to share family secrets, which actually were very thoughtful and created an environment of trust among us. And listening to him, listening to Anthea, listening to John, one thing that emerges from this is actually that we do have good policy framework and framing devices. How do we pick one or two kind of cross-cutting issue that we actually drive towards implementation together? That actually tries to actually touch on the enabling conditions, that is, so that we actually get something done on the ground and create a momentum of positive change. Because complexity exists everywhere. Complexity in South Africa, as Edgar pointed out, has a very cherished history that results in where we are. So my learning from this conversation, Tole, is how we can focus our effort into few things in the beginning and actually drive through vertically and actually get results on the ground that are long-term shifts, but also inclusive and green, as everyone pointed out, but works towards creating this recovery, these jobs that everyone's talking about. So it's been a fascinating listen to people. I really appreciate the input from everyone. Thank you, Sithole.
Okay, thanks very much. Colleagues, I'm not going to make any attempt at continuation. I'm being told, by the way, I am managed. I'm being told that we have to go to the next session. And again, just before I stop, I would like to thank everybody, especially people that came through and were sitting and listening and also jotting down some notes about this is a great partnership, at least in theory. Obviously, the practice is going to be something else. And I think we have been warned, there's going to be lots of discussions before we even hit the ground. So we must invest in being clear conceptually what it is that we want to do. We have to be clear in terms of how it is that we're going to partner, particularly with the municipalities. I'm sometimes called a shop steward of municipalities. And I don't have problems with that particular label. I think it's a very important thing that municipalities or cities are defended in one way or the other. So that's the second issue. The Urban Festival itself continues. The closing ceremony is, of course, tomorrow, but there's going to be continuation of activities. I think in the way that we have conceptualized it, we wish that it was something that was endless. But I would like to thank everybody for having invested the last 2 hours of their time into this, what I would call a very fruitful discussion. And thanks to my panelists, thanks to all our political principals that were here, and thanks for everybody, particularly people that were sitting in the background and ensuring that this becomes live and it becomes fruitful. Sean, Pandora, Steph, and everybody else that is in the background. Thanks very much. A round of applause if we are able to. Cheers very much. Thank you. Thank you.